Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Cybersecurity Recruiter podcast. Today, I'm joined by my special guest, Scott Singer. Scott, how you doing, my friend?
I'm great. Nice to be here.
Good. Yeah. Thank you for joining me. I think we're both in not too bad a mood considering it's a Monday morning, hey?
True, but my Monday's been long enough already.
Yeah, it sounds very familiar. But just for everyone listening, I'm just going to do you a bit of an intro, Scott. Feel free to correct me afterwards if I get anything wrong. I often do. So, yeah, you were in the US Navy for just over 30 years. After that, you then progressed on to PAR Systems. You were there for just over a decade, where you held the position of CIO. You were then a board member on the Minnesota Technology Associations. Again, that was for around 11 and a half years, just over. You were also the interim managing director for the University of Minnesota for the Central Medical Device Security. Currently, you are a board member of Members Alliance Minnesota. You are also an advisory board member for the Cybersecurity Summit. Again, a posting you've held for over a decade. And you were also the CEO, Chief Executive Officer of CyberNINES, and that is currently a position you also hold as well. But welcome to the show, mate. And your time management skills must be good. You sound like a busy chap to me.
You also made me very old there. So one thing to keep in mind that 6 years of the Navy was active duty and 24 was part-time. So
Okay.
in that part-time, in one kind of large position you missed. For 16 years, I worked at Medtronic. And so that was my ATA MBA school job. And a lot of the things that I've worked with in my life have been things that are mission driven type companies. And the Navy obviously has a strong mission, and Medtronic had a strong mission. And I'm trying to keep that in mind with my current role in CyberNINES, working to protect defense industrial base companies from cybersecurity attacks.
I think the thing is, Scott, I think that mission driven in terms of kind of motivation and tapping into your sense of purpose, I think it's fair to say it's very much always been there. And I think at the minute, with what's going on in the world, it's a pretty dramatic, crazy world right now. I would imagine your motivation levels and your sense of purpose and the mission is pretty high on the priority list in the current climate.
It definitely is. Defense and companies are constantly getting attacked. And a lot of the companies we're talking about that are getting attacked are very small businesses. So that's part of my mission, is to help support and find cost-effective ways to protect those companies.
Yeah, okay. Scott, over the years, not everyone progresses up to your seniority level. You're holding various different senior postings. What do you feel is the kind of secret sauce, if you like, to getting up to where you're up to now and having the success you've had in the industry?
I think a lot of it is that I play well with others. Competency will get you so far, right? You can be good you can know a lot, you can be the best programmer, you can be the best in whatever field you have, but if you can't then translate that into eventually really solving big problems for companies and businesses, you're not going to really get to that next level. I think it's important to network, to be seen. Ability to work on teams is really important. And again, ability to solve problems.
So the relationships and the communication piece and really harnessing and refining those over a sustained and long period of time.
I agree.
Yeah, cool. Any tips, Scott, for people listening that are looking to, because I don't think it's talked about enough. I think we're starting to talk about it more, but I notice people that have progressed to a certain seniority level within security that's echoed across different episodes of the pod, like relationships, kind of network, getting on with people. And I don't think it's something that's spoken about enough for people that are listening that are really interested in enhancing those skills if they perhaps know they're not where they need to be at the minute? Would you have any advice there? Have you always been great at it, or is it something you had to work on yourself? Or
No, I was not good at this when I started out in my career. The Navy did help me quite a bit in this space because I got out of college and I was a young kid just out of school and put in front of basically, I was in charge of about 25 people, and a lot of them were older than me, smarter than me, more experienced. And all just because I was the officer, I was put in charge of this group. And so I was pretty introverted in a lot of ways, which a lot of the cybersecurity and tech people tend to be a little bit on the introverted side. And that requires practice and confidence in your skills over time to be able to overcome some of that. So it's important to put yourself out there. Okay. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. If you've got a specific skill set, work at trying to get yourself on panels. And there's all kinds of opportunities these days to do webinars and podcasts like this, for example, that can get you to hone your skills and your ability to be able to get up in front of people and talk. I know, for example, if I'm doing a presentation and I'm reading from a slide, it doesn't go well. Okay. I sound like a robot, like an AI robot with a bad language
yeah, yeah.
interface. It's best to know what you're talking about, be a subject matter expert on the slide you're trying to present, and then only put up there like something to keep you on track, to keep you talking about what you need to talk about. So again, I don't want to get too long-winded, but a lot of it is practicing and until you get better at it.
Thanks, Scott, and definitely don't apologise for being long-winded. I think there's some really good things in there that could help people. It's really nice to hear you say things like you weren't great at it at first. You're an introvert. You said you felt uncomfortable, awkward. There's a lot of people out there, if they're struggling on their communication skills, I would imagine those things, those three feelings are probably feelings that they're having. So it's nice to hear that that's how you felt. And it sounds to me like you had to really push through, step outside that comfort zone, and perhaps make a few mistakes along the way to,
Oh, I
get.
know, Richard. I remember one time standing in front of almost 1,000 people, and I was, it was a Medtronic, the whole IT organization, and I had to present on basically it was like desktop standards, right? And I vapor locked. Okay. I'm looking out there, and I just all of a sudden I was like, I couldn't speak. And
Oh.
that was a harrowing moment. And then I look back now, it's just, I don't worry about it. And a lot of it is understanding that people do want to hear you speak and you do have
Mm.
good things to say and you can make mistakes and people aren't going to really even likely notice you made a mistake in some cases. And that's important to keep in mind that it's okay to get up there and make mistakes. People are human.
No, definitely. And thanks for sharing that for us, because it would be really easy for people to flick down your profile now, board member here, advisory board member there, CEO, and just think, it's all right for him. He must have just naturally just gone bang and straight into it. But to hear you say
Yep.
that, it's good. And I know it will help people listening out there. So, Scott, I want to tap into a bit of your business skills, your business acumen. I think there's some people out there in the security world that are running businesses doing well, but I also know there's people out there struggling. What advice have you got for business owners out there that are going on a business journey? I would imagine you've probably had some times where you've had to be resilient. Again, I would imagine that success wasn't linear. Any kind of tips, advices, hints on that front?
Be prepared not to make any money the first couple of years as you're building your business. It's nice to be able to make some money when you start, but be prepared that it's going to be tough as you start to build up your book of business and your reputation. And your reputation is really important. Most of my business is kind of word of mouth. At least that's how we started out, was that word of mouth. I really haven't done a lot of marketing. So what else can I talk about? It's, be careful as you grow your business and hire people, it's important to take your time as you hire people, because in a small business that you have a few bad hires, and those few bad hires are going to be the ones that are keeping you from making money yourself, right? And so it's important to fire fast and hire slow. And you want A players, some B players, and no C players. Okay. If you know that kind of reference to, it should be obvious, A, B, and C. People like to get A's, they don't like to get C's, right? So those are some of the kind of the bigger things I guess I'd talk about. And it's important to, I deal with a lot of small to medium sized businesses. However, I also deal with a lot of multinationals. I was on a call with a multi-billion-dollar company this morning with the CEO. Okay. That's a different type of conversation than you have with a small business. Okay. And it's just the scope, right? The small business owner, he knows everything that's going on in the business, right? The large multinational doesn't. He's relying on lots of different people to get things done. So it's important as you're a small business and growing, is to know who you're talking to, your audience. When I'm talking to a small business, I like to put myself in that person's position. Okay. I'm either going to be spending $40,000 with this cybersecurity company to get ready for CMMC, or I can buy another bass boat. Okay. We're in Minnesota and upper Midwest. So that's what's going on in his mind, right? Do I have to pay for this stuff? And so being able to really sit down and come at him with, okay, here are the main points to understand about this whole cybersecurity requirement you're supposed to be meeting for the DoD. Okay. Here are the 3 or 4 things you need to do. Okay. Here's what you need to do to be able to stay in business and work for this large prime contractor. This is what they're asking you to do. So I try and translate these big federal acquisition regulations and defense federal acquisition regulation supplements and put it down to salient bullet points that they understand. This is the stuff you really have to do. All of that said, if you're solving a problem that they need solved, you're helping them, and they're going to engage you and bring you back.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. What you've described there, it's like the definition of being really good at communication. You talked about putting yourself in the other person's shoes. That's something that's just imperative for great communicative skills. Being clear and concise, the simplification of the problem or the solution, and then just having a heightened self-awareness around from the other person's side. I think whether it's a business owner talking to a customer or whether it's someone interviewing for a job, I think if you can take those 4 things and put them into your own communication skills or whatever it might be, I think it's going to help. So thank you for that.
Of course.
Over the years, Scott, when you've been building the businesses and you talked about not making things being tough, obviously for the first couple of years, it's a longer term plan when you're setting up. When you did go through tough times and stuff like that, is there anything you think of to push through? Is there any kind of little mental tricks or games that you play on yourself or anything you tell yourself to push through tougher times and get those resilience levels to a certain level?
Go out for a run at lunchtime or go for a bike ride, or those are some of the things that I would try and do. It's really important to prioritize things. I don't have myself sorted out the next day before I go to bed. I don't have to, you don't have to over engineer this or boil the ocean on this, but just take a look at your calendar. Okay. What's going on the next day? And you can just do a couple little things ahead of time before you go to bed or before. And when you're an entrepreneur or you own your own company, you're always working, right? It's not a 9 to 5 job. It's all the time. And so figuring out how to make your life a little easier is important. So I like to figure out, what do I got to do the next day so I don't walk in the morning and sit down and get all stressed out, right? Now you put yourself at a disadvantage right out of the chute, the beginning of the day. There was a guy that also, Bill McRaven, who was an admiral and who was actually head of special forces for the whole U.S. military at one point. And is a guy I used to golf with in the Philippines when I was on a different lifetime, a long time ago. He came out with this idea: make your bed every morning. So you do your one thing well. At least I made my bed. So it's just things like that that kind of keep me going. Otherwise, I get too stressed out thinking about I need to get this done, that done. I'm not a huge list maker, okay, but I do keep some things that are critical that I need to do that day ahead of me in the morning, like we talked about. And that seems to be able to support me getting through the day.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Scott. Are you a good golfer?
I was.
Business took over.
And my handicap got down to about 6 at one point in time, but then I was
Cool.
probably playing a little too much golf, and now it's not 6; it's more like 12. But I'm fine with that. It's still, I go out and golf, and it relaxes me. Other people go out and play golf, and they get even more stressed out, right?
Yeah, I'm laughing. I used to play golf when I was really, really young. I was absolutely obsessed with it. But yeah, I'm laughing because I used to get quite frustrated when I hit bad shots. But yeah, if you got down to 6, I think you could switch off. But to get down to 6, if you want to stay there, you've got to allocate some time, shall we say?
Yep, and some mental stress to it too.
But yeah, I think a lot of the stuff you're saying there, you mentioned stuff there, planning for the next day, the night before. Essentially, there's an old saying that we say over here: keep it simple, prioritize certain tasks. And I think it's easy, like with the internet, you've got all these things pulling you this different way. You've got people ringing you up trying to sell you stuff and do this and do that. It's so easy to get tracked off. But I think the compound effect of just, let's say, prioritizing, keeping things simple, doing these certain things over time, I do think that the overall effect has clearly made you move forward in life and well in business.
I used to have a rule on my email. I don't do it anymore, but I used to have a rule that anytime I was CC'd on an email, it dumped it into a different folder.
I'm glad I know that. If I'm emailing you anything important, I definitely won't CC anyone in.
Now you know.
Very good, cool. And it leads quite on nicely, talking about various different daily tasks you do to keep yourself moving forward. It leads quite nicely on to mental health and stuff like that. Burnout's a real thing in the industry. I've had people on the show that have talked about it before. Any advice for keeping yourself in a good state mental health wise and things like that? And any tips and hints there for the listener, Scott?
I can give you a cautionary tale. My own situation, so just a little bit of background. My company, CyberNINES, there are basically the DoD is coming up with a new program that's going to require third party assessments for the 80,000 or so defense contractors in the US. Canada's jumping on board with a similar program, and some other countries are too. I'm sure the UK is not too far behind either. But that said, this program, we had to go through an assessment by the Department of Defense to be authorized to do these third party assessments. And right now, there are 51 companies that are authorized, and CyberNINES being one of them. So I was preparing for this assessment. And I wasn't practicing what we just talked about. Go for a run at lunchtime and take mental health breaks and play golf. And I was not doing that. And so this was about 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, and I was spending pretty much, I would say 60 hours a week at least working on getting ready for this assessment. And that went on for about 3 months as I was getting ready for this. And it's complicated. You have to meet all these NIST 800, 171 controls, 110 of them, 320 assessment objectives. And you can tell I've been.
You can. I was just about to say that.
Yeah. I had to go. I put this traceability matrix together that tied every control to objective evidence that showed I'm meeting it. And it was this big thing, right? And probably over engineered it a bit, but then my assessment was only a day and a half instead of 4. But as I was preparing for that, I had a stroke. So I was literally on a Sunday at home, and my son was coming over for dinner, lives nearby, and I just came out of the shower and I had the worst headache I'd ever had in my whole life. So my brain was bleeding, and found out that ended up being in the hospital for about a week and a half in intensive care and survived it. One of those 50-50 chance to live situations. and got through it. And so I share that because I was undiagnosed high blood pressure. And so for years, I was a little bit on the hypertensive side. And I started running a lot, did 4 marathons. So you can sit here and think it's not going to happen to you because you're running, you're biking. I did lots of 100-mile bike rides, and you think that's going to cover you, and you just have some genetic issue that you really need to deal with, and it required medication. And I just hated taking medication, and it came back and got me. That's just something to keep in mind, is take care of your health. And it doesn't always mean that you're going to be able to solve every health problem you have by lifestyle. Okay. And it goes a long way, but in my case, it just took a little bit of stressing me out over a longer period of time. And that's what caused the stroke.
Thanks for sharing that, Scott. You seem like you're fighting fit now. You all good?
I'm good. Luckily, I got through that situation, and then I've been taking care of myself much better now from both a mental health perspective and a medical, seeing the doctor, and he takes me to take a shingles shot. I go take the shingles shot, that kind of stuff. He tells me to take the high blood pressure med. Okay, I take the high blood.
Yeah, we'll definitely keep listening to him, my friend. I think that's a wise move, but it puts it in perspective, doesn't it? I say business is important, and I always say apart from family and health, there isn't anything more important than the career. But when something like that happens, it does make you stop and think, doesn't it?
It definitely did. It definitely made me think. Now, of course, it didn't stop me from rescheduling that DoD assessment and going through it and passing it. But however, I do feel that I have tried to live the cliche of let's stop and smell the roses a little bit. And I know it's a cliche, but there's some strong meaning and thoughts behind that.
Yeah, there is. And we'll come on to the CMMC stuff in just a moment, because I know you've spoken in front of Congress and stuff like that. And there's definitely some stuff I'd like to dig into there. I don't know if you've done this, Scott. I saw Ray Dalio, the hedge fund guy, talk a lot about meditation and how it gives him a helicopter view on his business, and he puts the meditation down, a testament to his success. Have you ever tried? I love them. I fell off it for ages, and I've just got back on it lately,
Okay.
and it declutters my mind big time. I don't know if you've ever tried it, or have you ever given it a go?
I have not, but I think running to me is very similar to that kind of meditation state, because I stop thinking about other things. In a lot of respects, my mind clears and I'm just out running. Okay. And you get to know your body. And so it's an interesting idea. I think I'm going to take a look at that based on what you said. So thank you.
It's really good. And I think you're talking about, you mentioned there about dealing with different people and dealing with different sorts of people. I think to be the best version of yourself as a leader, you need a clear head, don't you? It's certainly going to help. But yeah, as we come on to the CMMC stuff, you are massively qualified to this. I was going to say, like, when you were reeling off the different frameworks and stuff like that, I was like, this is a man that knows his stuff. But can you tell us a bit about when you testified in front of Congress for CMMC, and what people listening should and shouldn't be aware of?
Sure. So originally, this came up because Congress was concerned about the cost and impact on small business. So that was really the impetus for the hearings. And I was brought in, or I was asked, not subpoenaed, which is much better to be asked, to volunteer to go. And again, I'll be honest, it's an honor to be asked to speak before Congress, but it's also a bit nerve-wracking. And as I started to dig into this and look at this, I figured out you have to have a written testimony, and you have the written testimony is something that sits in the Library of Congress forever, right? And so that gave me the most stress to make sure I got that document right and that I didn't look like an idiot. Who is this guy? And the actual testimony part of the hearing part of it, keep in mind that the congressmen and women asking you the questions, they know less about this than you do. When I was talking about you get in front of a bunch of people and you start talking in a presentation, when you know this stuff, then it is easier to talk about. It's more natural. And so I didn't get really that stressed in the actual testimony because I knew the answers to the questions. Now, of course, there were a couple of congressmen that just talked and didn't ask me a question. They just used it as an opportunity to spout about something. And at the end of it, I'm thinking to myself, was there a question there? And no, there wasn't. But overall, I enjoyed the experience. I think it's good. I think it's part of doing your civic duty to help them understand what the issues were. I focused a lot on the fact that the cost of CMMC is going to be difficult for small businesses, and there does need to be some ability to find funding for these businesses. And it's easy for the executive branch to come out and say, you're supposed to have been doing this since 2017. Okay, really, the DFARS rule goes back to 20, but the easy button of NIST 800-171, that's not really an easy button. But the original rule had you have to meet like 853 and scope it to what you needed. And there's 1,200 controls in 853. In 2017, they came out with a more prescriptive framework that's a subset of 853, which was only that 110 controls, and that made life easier. But it's still a heavy lift for a small business, okay? And they can't afford to go after some of the costs here. And my concern was, it might seem unusual because I'm trying to sell to this group of people, right? But my concern is a lot of these companies were going to drop out of the whole ecosystem because they can't afford to sell to the DoD. So if they're doing 10% or 25% DoD work, they're just going to say it's not cost effective for me to keep going and selling to the DoD. I'm just going to do all commercial now. So that's what I was trying to really impress on them, that let's find this is a public good to have these small businesses working in the defense industry, and treat it like a public good, and that help them fund it through like the SBA, Small Business Administration, or the Manufacturing Extension Partnerships, the MEPs, which is a NIST group that each state has an MEP that are trying to help the small businesses grow. So I was trying to give some ideas around that. So that was a lot of my general focus of that testimony.
Good, yeah. And I think it's nice for you to be able to take that commercial view on it as well, because I'm sure some of these people making the policies probably don't. You've obviously had the experience of running a small business, getting a business off the ground. The logistical, just by throwing something in there and implementing it, would be pretty chaotic for a businessman or businesswoman. So having that phase, I'm sure they appreciated your words during that hearing.
Some didn't, probably.
Scott, do you find that you were talking then about it's going to sit there forever, it's got to stand the test of time, it's not going anywhere, it's going to be there? You're really pushing yourself. I've found from like doing the podcast, especially, like I used to get really nervous on a client meeting, whereas now they're still important to me and stuff like that, but I just don't really get nervous anymore, because compared to doing a LinkedIn Live or a podcast, it just seems like a breeze. So I think when you do push yourself harder, it does make the kind of day-to-day tasks in your job seem a lot more manageable and straightforward. Have you found the same? See you nodding.
Oh yes, I talked about that before, being the introverted person and practicing and being able to get out in front of it, and I think is really critical.
I think it's like a muscle. We talked about running or going to the gym. It's the first time you go on that run, it's really hard, or the first time you lift those weights, it's really challenging. But then after you do it, you exercise the muscle, and things get easier. But yeah, cool. CMMC is a really hot topic at the minute, isn't it? Is there anything else for the listeners that they should be aware of, you think, that could be helpful? I know there's different things coming out. You're probably more up to speed than me, but there's different things and different dates set, and kind of people were perhaps starting to take it a bit more seriously now and stuff like that. Any words of wisdom?
Oh, words of wisdom. Yeah, get started. If you're going to stay in the DoD business, be working on it, would be the biggest words of wisdom that I have. Don't be afraid of it. Don't over engineer it. People tend to want to just make it more complicated than it needs to be. It's still difficult, but don't make it more difficult than it needs to be. It's not going away. There's been a lot of people that just felt the program was going to die off at some point. And 32 CFR proposed rule is being adjudicated by DoD right now. It's likely going to hit the streets the end of the year. That just defines the whole CMMC program. Another rule has to go through rulemaking, 48 CFR. That's the rule that's going to actually create the DFARS 252, 204, 70, 21 that's going to push the CMMC rule out on contracts and have that flow down through the supply chain. That is more likely to come out in mid 2025. Hey, you got about a year to get this really sorted out before it's going to start showing up in your contracts. And get started, get working on it, find a good partner to help you get through the process and do the math, figure out, is this going to make sense for me as a business owner to do this? Personally, I'm a little biased. I think it does because just being meeting NIST is also going to protect your business from ransomware attacks and being resilient, being able to recover from those attacks. So it's not just DoD data that you can protect here. You can also be protecting your own proprietary company information. So it's good all around. But again, my biggest advice is that don't over engineer this.
Okay. Cool. Thanks, Scott. So I know before when we were talking off air, and I know there'll be stuff you can and can't say here, but we were talking about an attack that you mentioned from before, an APT attack, something that we mentioned before. I know there's certain things you can and can't say. Can you tell us a bit about what happened there and some interesting story for the listeners?
I'm going to leave country names out and company names out because you can probably figure it out. But we were hit by APT team. And you notice, by the way, when I said that the first DFAR 7012 rule came out in 2013, there's no coincidence there. Okay. So a prime contractor got hit, and it was an RSA breach back in 2010. They got hit, and the nation state attacker found all their subcontractors that were working for them on a certain large project. And then the nation state then attacked those small businesses. Think of it as like the soft underbelly, right? They were easier to hit. And we always think that, okay, I'm just making a widget. Okay. Why would this widget be that critical? And we have something called aggregation, where we start putting all these small widgets together. All of a sudden, now we have a tank or an airframe or something, right? That those small pieces by themselves were not classified. They were likely controlled unclassified information, or ITAR, they call it, data. And so you put all these things together, and now we got an issue. Right. We're back to golf again here. Okay. I'm out on the golf course on Saturday morning trying to relax and take care of my mental health. And sure enough, I get a call from my CEO, and he says, email's not working. And I'm like, do you need to be getting emails at Saturday morning at 7:30 in the morning? But you can't tell your CEO that. So I didn't have we're a medium-sized defense contractor, and I had about 12 people in the IT organization, and then we used a bunch of stuff in MSP and stuff like that. But anyway, I'm like, all right. And I was actually playing pretty well. I think after the fifth hole, I was like maybe one over. But sure enough, I leave the golf course. I head into the office because I didn't really want to call anybody else in on a Saturday morning. And I'm a little techie at times. And I look at the email server, and it was pegged. I could see, email's not going anywhere because it was the network that was pegged, not the server. The server was running fine. The nation state was exfiltrating data. And that exfil, as they were pulling stuff out, I then started using a tool called Wireshark to figure out what the heck was causing all this traffic congestion. And I found one IP address, and I reverse looked it up and found the country that was doing this. And I blocked it, and eventually it stopped. Then the next day for them came in the morning and saw that it was shut down, and he started it up again. All of a sudden things took off again. It was a tough situation because back then we had a firewall, and we had virus software. That's what we had in place. That was it. Nothing else. That's not enough. It wasn't enough for APT1, and it's not enough today. Okay. You need you need some tools with some smarter heuristics and analytics to be able to figure out that people are laterally moving and doing bad things. And there's lots of 0 days out there today that make it difficult to just use virus software as your tool to stop this. So, of course, this is a Navy data that we're losing. And I then had to report, voluntarily disclose to the State Department, to the Navy, that this had happened. And then, of course, one of the board members that I had was the prior Secretary of the Navy, which made things a little spicy. And so part of that, though, is, and this is another lesson learned here, is I got hit. Okay, I was able to stop it before they got really all of our SolidWorks drawings. So that was good. I brought in experts to come in and support us. Mandiant is who we brought in to help support us, which is a kind of a known name. And then I had to then put a plan together, go forward, remediate, and go forward, right? Of course, FBI is involved and everything. But it's important when you are dealing with at a senior level and you're dealing with a board of directors that you don't go into that board meeting with those board members not knowing what you're going to do. It's talking to them ahead of time. It's putting a small team together of the board members. So I said, okay, I would like to form a small team of board members to get ready for the board meeting. And I picked, of course, the ex-Secretary of the Navy was one of my team members to work on this. And it's back to the communication, right? I don't know that my plan was any better than somebody else could do, but people knew what I was going to do ahead of time, and they knew the plan was good and we were going to get through this situation, and I didn't get fired. So that's probably the positive side of this. It is a real thing, and CISOs around, CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers, that's a short-lived job, right? They just don't last that long. And that really there needs to be some changes there in the industry. Otherwise, we're going to continue. We're not going to get the best people that want to take those roles, because if you're going to get fired in 2 or 3 years, that's a problem. Anyway, I'll stop there. But it was an interesting situation to work through.
Yeah, I bet it was. And there's loads going on with CISOs when you start seeing about the responsibilities on their shoulders now and different things that have gone on with certain companies in the past. It's certainly a crazy time to be a CISO at the minute. Yeah, golf's such a mental game, so I'm imagining that absolutely destroyed the round. You weren't one up. You weren't one over after 18. Put it that way.
Well, let's put it this way. I was not able to go back and play.
Yeah, I'm trying not to talk about golf, but I can't help it. Have you ever read Dave Pelt's The Short Game? You ever read that book?
No, I have not. I've heard of it. What have you read it? What makes it?
I've read it a long time ago, but basically it's all about just instantly knocking a couple of shots off your handicap from getting good at the short game. But it's a lot about the mental side of golf, certain things you can do in the morning when you wake up, certain things you can do just before you go to bed, certain things you can do in your mind that enhance your mental strength, basically. So a lot of stuff that you can relate to real life and business, but also obviously golf as well. But yeah, stick it on the reading list. You won't regret reading it. It's good.
Thanks.
But yeah, it sounds like that was an eventful, dramatic time. But it sounds like you handled it well and everyone was happy, yeah?
Yeah, relatively happy. I would rather it not have happened, but it was early on in the whole, it was APT1, right? So it was early on. And honestly, the article in Fortune magazine had just come out about APT1 when we got hit, right? And so I'm reading this fancy bear and blah, blah, blah. I'm reading this article. I'm like going, oh my gosh, that is exactly what happened to me.
Yeah, scary. You don't want those guys coming for you. Not ideal.
No.
Okay, on the subject of books and stuff like that, any books or podcasts that you've listened to that you found particularly helpful for, could be your management, leadership, business, or security career, that could help the listeners as well?
So it's interesting. The podcasts tend to be much more tactical for me versus the books tend to be much more strategic. And so the podcasts I listen to are fastest 5 minutes. It's a Kroll and Mooring for government contractors. It just talks about what's the current things, but they do focus heavily on IT and AI and CMMC and things like that. Then there's a CyberWire Daily I listen to, and those are the two that I go to pretty much regularly. There's a couple of Cybersecurity Today, Cybersecurity headlines I listen to, but not as much. On the book side, there's a really older book called Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goldman. And that's pretty much one of my favorite kind of books on human behavior. And I think it impacted me the most. And it had to do with you go into a room, and I'm just giving you one example. And you sit down and you're in a conference room and you're in a meeting, and you can start to see if you're speaking whether people are with you or against you. But you should be able to see it in their gestures. People start crossing their arms. And so that can tell you to start to change maybe how your delivery is going, because you're trying to get people to influence them to go down the path you want it to go. And so that to me was like, oh my gosh, I see that all the time. And I just think I knew about it ahead. I knew about it before. It just was a way to put everything together for me. But that's an important skill. And some people call it reading the room, whatever it is. But so that's one. Another book I really liked was The Entrepreneurial Rollercoaster. And a college friend of mine has really been mentoring me on helping me with my business. He actually was my best man in my wedding, but he took a small business and grew it to $40 million. He's been doing this for many more years than I have. And so we would spend, for a while when I was just starting, we would sit down. I've got a small condo in Madison, Wisconsin that I have that's by where our business company headquarters are. And I would have them over for breakfast, and then we would go through a chapter or two in this book. And that was really good for me at the beginning as I was starting to try and grow this business. And he's continued to be somebody that I can go to and talk to about this. The last CEO I had at Par Systems is somebody that I talk to a lot too. And then, so yeah, you'd be surprised how, and I know I just morphed into mentoring a little bit out of the books and podcasts, but you'd be surprised how many people would be willing to share their experiences with you. And people like to do that. It's a little bit of for them, it's an ego boost, right? It's back to emotional intelligence, right? It's understanding that they get some enjoyment out of being able to share their knowledge with somebody that's new to this space. So don't be afraid to ask, because people will, support you and do that.
Yeah, definitely. And I can imagine that really helped. And you mentioned there that some of this on the emotional intelligence book, some of the stuff you already knew, but I think the exact phrase you said was piece it together. But I think that's so relevant because sometimes we just need things refreshing, reminding, reinforcing. It really helps us. But I bet that was wicked sitting down with your mentor and your friend there and going through that.
That was
The
awesome.
chapters. Yeah, I bet it was, especially over
Yeah.
breakfast. Very nice.
It's the only time sometimes that's when I could get them, right?
Yeah,
It was early. It was
yeah.
before the workday started.
Cool. Yeah, but again, from your side, you've made the effort there, jig things around to suit that particular person, and do this and get up early, and it definitely makes a difference. Scott, just to jump back a few minutes because we pushed over it like 5-10 minutes ago. You mentioned about when the scenario was going on with the attack, and you got different board members and spoke to them. We pushed over it. Did you speak to them separately first, then, and you let them know what they were going to do to ensure they were on side, ensure they were happy with what your strategy was? Then when you went into the board meeting, things ran a lot smoother. Am I understanding that correctly? Is that how it worked?
That's exactly it.
Mm.
And they can help you shape the message too. Again, it's asking, don't be afraid to ask people for help. People tend to, in general, people want to help. And in general, people want things to get better. And so if you're coming at it from that perspective, then I've found that, people are receptive to that. And that's how I approached this really critical board meeting. I've been in other board meetings, Medtronic and other places, that it's been fairly stressful again earlier in my career, and I didn't have the experience that I had later on. They all pull their pants on one leg at a time. That whole kind of thing. But yeah, being able to have more of that one-on-one discussion with the board members. So I talked to each one by phone before the actual board meeting. Okay.
Yeah.
Talk through what my concerns were, what I thought we could do, some of the cost trade-offs, because you can't throw unlimited money to solve this problem. There's a diminishing returns on this, and you got to figure out where on the graph you need to stop, right? And I'm trying to explain individually one-on-one what my thinking is here, which is a lot better than trying to do it in front of the group, because sometimes boards will sometimes look for the chink in the armor, the flaw in the plan, right? Because they're all sitting there trying sometimes to make themselves look good in front of their peers, okay, at your expense. That can happen in board meetings very quickly. And so making the board members feel that they were part of the presentation you're making now gives them ownership, maybe the wrong word, but they're vested in the solution because they were part of it. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And I can totally see how this could relate to in any form of management meeting or meeting in a business sense. I could see you getting additional visibility on what's going to happen. Perhaps they would bring certain objections to your attention that maybe you did or didn't see. You're going in there with backing, support, so you're going to get your message across in a more confident tone and manner. So yeah, I can see. I think that's a really smart move, and I think for everyone listening, in any form of leadership, management, doesn't need to be at board level. It could be, but I could see why that works really well, and is a really smart move.
Yeah, it was just my brain bounced a bit because I remember back when I was in the Navy in the Pacific Fleet, and I was the briefing officer, and it was during the Gulf War, and I'm briefing, and I made a mistake when I was given my brief because one of the admirals asked me, it was all the admirals and some what they call SESs, Senior Executive Service. It was the leadership for Pacific Fleet. Somebody had asked me how many Tomahawks are on a certain island. Okay. I can't say the island. And I said, I don't know. But then I went over and I asked the head of the supply chain, basically for the military. Okay. And I go, sir, do you know how many there are? And that's a big mistake because he wasn't prepared and ready to answer that question in that situation, right? So now I put him on the spot in front of the 4-star admiral, and I then was after the meeting. I got called to his office, and I was shredded. So there's life lessons here.
Yeah, there is. But yeah, I just see it, Scott, with different people that come on the pod. It's basically, like you said, essentially it boils down to good communication skills, but it's almost like this heightened self awareness, heightened emotional intelligence. It really, and it just relates so heavily to moving forward in your career and your professional life. It's like I say, you're going to struggle to move forward without these skills, and until you hear it spoken about like this, I think it's hard to grasp. But yeah, you're shedding some nice light on it, and yeah, it's nice to hear those stories from back in the day as well. I bet that one was a little bit awkward at the time.
I got one other story that's really interesting, too far, but I was the planning officer for an exercise in Cairo, Egypt, and I was sitting in this is when Mubarak was in charge before the fall. And so I'm sitting in their Pentagon, right? And I had to go through all this training that they're a verbal commitment agreement, right? And so they were trying to get me to send 2 aircraft carriers for this exercise instead of 1. And you can imagine, If Scott said, "Oh yeah, sure, that'd be okay," all of a sudden I wrote a check for 2 aircraft carriers to go to an exercise. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And it's really, we then, back to communication and clear communication. At the end of every meeting, I had everybody sign meeting minutes. So we had somebody track down everything we said. This is an overboard, right, scenario, but when you're dealing with a verbal contract culture, it then becomes really important for a culture like the US. We want to see written contracts and things. And so that's how we overcame that. We had to write notes on everything. But anyway, that's where my brain bounces. Like, oh my gosh, I almost wrote a check for 2 aircraft carriers.
Scott, on the mentor piece, you mentioned a story. You gave a story there about your mentor, and I promise this is the last question. I know I said I'd only keep you an hour, and I know you're a busy man, so I won't keep you too much longer. But on the mentor piece, it sounded like you had a good mentor there. I know there was a friendship there. How did that mentor come about? Or for people listening that haven't got a mentor, what advice or guidance or tips or hints would you have for people that are trying to seek? Because I do think in terms of success, especially for people working remotely, I think having a mentor is very important for moving forward.
Yeah, so I brought up the fact that don't be afraid to ask. People are, and don't be afraid, don't be discouraged if somebody says they can't because they're too busy. Okay, that doesn't mean you stop looking for the right mentor. And so, like I said, don't be afraid. Something to think about is that when you're looking at mentors, it's often good to make sure they're not in the same business that you are in or have the same customers or clients that you might have because you're looking for an independent voice that you can count on and rely on, that something's not going to come back in some weird way. So that's important. Looking for somebody, obviously somebody that's successful, right? That's been successful in a similar space. It's, if you're an entrepreneur, it may not make sense to find a mentor that's the CEO of a large company necessarily, unless they built the company up right from nothing. So I look for things, I think, that are, look for mentors that understand what you're going through and somebody that you can bounce ideas off of or explain situations you're in that have been through it themselves.
Yeah, cool. I could see why having a mentor that's too close to home could cause issues. Definitely, it could cause a few problems, couldn't it?
Yeah, maybe your spouse isn't the best one to use
Yeah,
as your mentor.
yeah, but probably as well someone that, again, like you said, that doesn't want to be a yes man or a yes woman. You probably want someone that is a bit consultative and isn't afraid to put you on the spot and give you like a temporary hard time, maybe.
I have this one mentor, and he's a serial entrepreneur. Again, I met him on the golf course, of course, and it's a good place to meet people. But there's lots of other kind of scenarios. There are places you choose mentors from, church or wherever.
Mm.
And he is always pushing me, right? I remember him just, why aren't you paying yourself? And he just, you need to find the different thing to go after if you're not paying yourself. He's really going after, why are you not making money? And in the end, what it does is it says, okay, I start digging into this and I have too much overhead.
Mm.
Okay, so it forced me to go look at it. Why am I not? Okay, instead of just accepting something.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I think it's great. It's interesting here as well. So you've mentioned two different mentors. How many have you got?
Oh, I would count it like in the 4 or 5
Wow.
different
Okay.
mentors, and they have different skill sets and different experiences.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. It's interesting for me to hear, and I think that's really interesting for the listeners to hear. And again, I think it all ties in with. I can imagine that improving your mental health. I can imagine it reducing stress levels. The fact that you can just talk stuff out, it help you move forward. I just think the benefits and how long a period were those mentors acquired over?
20 years, some are
Okay.
like shorter. Some have been
Okay.
shorter, related to this CyberNINES, my new company, and because I needed to find that mentor that was focused, knew this space. Says so. Some were 20 years, some were 4 years.
Yeah. Cool. Cool. Very good. I think we've set the record on the show, Scott, for talking about golf the most, which I've enjoyed, by the way. I was stopping myself. I could have talked more and more because I do like it. I do
That's a
like a
good
bit.
golf's a good metaphor, right? When you go out in the golf course and you're playing with somebody, when you look at how are they reacting to a bad shot, right? Are they cheating? Okay. How do they handle themselves on the golf course is a good metaphor.
Yeah, I actually went up to St Andrews the other week, and they closed the course at St Andrews in Scotland on a Sunday now, and they just let you walk all around it and take photos. They even let people walk across the greens. I couldn't believe. I was expecting to walk around the outside and maybe go for a beer or whatever. But yeah, it was a real
That would
treat.
be awesome.
Yeah, it was really cool. But Scott, thanks for this. It's been really good. It's really nice to get your insights into how you've navigated the world and the corporate world and the security world and leadership and various different personalities. There's been loads in there that have helped me now, and I'm sure will help the listeners. But I think we've about covered it. Do you think we've covered everything, my friend?
I think so. No, I appreciate it too. I learned some things here too, so that's what
Yeah.
it's all about.
Yeah, no, it's been good. But Scott, I'm just going to say bye to you, but I'll just edit this bit out. We just need to wait in for about 30 seconds while it loads. But I'll say bye to you now. So thank you. Thanks, Scott. It's been really helpful, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, it sounds good.